The text came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. "I need you to know I value you too much to lose you." Marisol read it standing in her kitchen in the dark, still in her work clothes, the overhead light off because she hadn't turned it on when she came in, the way you don't when you're distracted by the anticipation of something that hasn't happened yet. She'd been waiting 3 weeks for Daniel to say something, anything, after the night at the harbor where their conversation had turned into something that neither of them named. She'd replayed it the way you replay a piece of music, where you can't locate the moment it shifted into a different key. The way he'd touched her hand on the railing. The way he'd turned to look at her the 3 seconds before he'd looked away. The text was not what she'd been waiting for. The text was a door quietly closing while pretending to open. She typed back, "What does that mean?" 3 dots appeared. Disappeared, appeared again. "It means I don't want to mess up what we have." She set the phone face down on the counter and stood there for a long time in the refrigerator hum, her upstairs neighbor's television, murmuring through the ceiling like someone else's life going on at a polite distance. She'd heard this before. Everyone had. It was the sentence men deployed when they wanted the warmth without the weight, when they wanted a woman to stay close enough to be useful, but not close enough to make a claim. It sounded like protection. It functioned like a wall with the bricks hidden inside the insulation. What she didn't know yet, what she couldn't have known standing there at 11:47 p.m. in a dark kitchen with her work badge still around her neck, was that Daniel Mercer had sent the exact same sentence to someone else. Same phrasing, same cadence, same 11 words. And that woman had kept the screenshot. Her name was Priya Anand, and they met the way you meet people who are about to change everything, completely by accident, in a line at the coffee cart outside the courthouse, where Marisol worked as a paralegal at Callaway and Fitch, 3 weeks after the harbor, on the first Thursday of November that felt like October had refused to leave. Priya dropped her wallet. Marisol picked it up. They exchanged the small, warm words of strangers, doing each other small kindnesses, and the whole transaction should have taken 30 seconds and left no trace. Except Priya had looked at the work badge on Marisol's lanyard, Callaway and Fitch, 3rd floor, and something shifted in her expression. Not alarm exactly, more the particular alertness of someone who has been looking for something and is now uncertain whether they've found it or whether finding it is even what they want. "You work at Callaway and Fitch?" "3rd floor, corporate contracts. Does a Daniel Mercer still work there?" The name was a stone dropped into standing water. Marisol felt the ripple before she could think about whether to show it. "He's a senior associate," she said carefully, with the voice she used for deposition prep, level, giving nothing away by inflection. "Do you know him?" "I did," Priya said. And then she smiled, not a warm smile and not a cruel one, but the kind of smile that contains a story, the way a stone contains heat from a fire that went out a long time ago. "Let me buy you a coffee. I want to show you something." They found a table at the back of a cafe called The Hollow, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of place designed to feel like somewhere that kept confidences. Priya set her phone face up on the table between them. Marisol registered it as a gesture before she registered it as an action. Not casual, not habitual, but deliberate. A signal. "I have documentation, and I am prepared to share it." "How long have you known him?" Priya asked. 4 years. We've been, Marisol paused. I don't have a clean word for it. Close. Yes, close in a way that doesn't have a name, because he's never let it have one. Marisol looked at her steadily. "You too?" 18 months, Priya said. "I was an associate at his old firm, Branford and Lease, before his lateral move to Callaway. He left in March. I left in April. I told myself it was unrelated. She picked up the phone. Read this. The screenshot was dated 8 months ago. The contact name at the top, read Rena. Below it, a conversation thread. Marisol read it the way she'd been trained to read contracts. First quickly, for the structure, then slowly, for the specific language. Daniel's message was 3 lines from the bottom of the thread. I need you to know I value you too much to lose you. The words were so precisely identical to what she'd received at 11:47 p.m. that Marisol read them twice to be certain she wasn't pattern matching incorrectly. Not similar. Not the same sentiment rephrased. Identical. Word for word. The same 11 words in the same order, and nothing in that construction that sounded assembled rather than felt, which was exactly the problem, because it didn't sound assembled. It sounded like something a person said when they were fighting the truth of their own feeling. It sounded specific. It was not specific. It was a template. How many women have you found? She asked. Priya's hands settled around her cup. That I know of? 3. Rena is the woman in that thread. There's also a woman named Catherine who worked at the Lakeview Community Foundation. That's one of the nonprofits where he volunteers. Rena found Catherine, reached out to me, and the 3 of us have been documenting, Marisol said. Yes, you have a folder. We have a folder, Priya said. And then, carefully, we were hoping to have a 4th person, someone who knows the current firm. Marisol was quiet for a moment. The calf moved around them, the knock of a portafilter, a burst of laughter from a table near the window, the soft jazz loop the speakers were running on some kind of repeat cycle. She thought about the harbor. She thought about 3 weeks of waiting for a response, and then 11 words that explained, with absolute clarity, why she'd been waiting. Send me the folder, she said. I'll need a few days. Take what you need, Priya said. Then, I'm glad I dropped my wallet. Did you drop it on purpose? Priya smiled. The warm version this time. Not yet. Ask me again in a week. The folder arrived in a shared drive invitation that evening. Priya had titled it, with a dry precision Marisol found immediately reassuring, Documentation. Inside were subfolders for each woman, organized chronologically. The text threads spanned 31 months of what Marisol began to think of, in her paralegal shorthand, as the operational record. She read it over 2 evenings, cross-legged on her kitchen floor with a legal pad. The same kitchen, the same floor, where she'd stood 3 weeks ago in the dark reading 11 words and trying to decide what they meant. The first evening she read for the structure. The second evening she read for the language, the specific words, the chosen phrases, the things that were said in the moments that mattered, and how they were constructed. A pattern clarified like a photograph developing in a dark room, the shapes arriving before the details did, and then the details arriving with a precision that made the shapes feel inevitable in retrospect. An initial period of warmth and close attention. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing anyone could point to. Just a man who seemed genuinely interested in a woman's thoughts, her work, her interior life. Who remembered what she'd mentioned in passing. Who showed up in her professional orbit with a consistency that felt like it might be meaningful. Then a moment of escalating closeness. Something almost said. Something almost done. The kind of threshold moment that exists only in retrospect, when you find yourself a step further than you expected to be. And then, always the same rotating vocabulary deployed at the exact moment a woman began to expect something real. I value you too much to lose you. I don't want to mess up what we have. You mean more to me than you know, that's why I can't. What we have is too important to risk on something impermanent. The phrases were not random. They were calibrated. Each one sounded like restraint, sounded like the words of a man fighting his own better nature on your behalf. Each one positioned the refusal as a form of care, the distance as a gift, the limitation as evidence of how much he valued her. Each one made the woman feel that she was being protected by the very thing that was being withheld from her. And because the protection sounded sincere, because nothing in the vocabulary was angry or dismissive or unkind, it was very difficult to name what was actually happening. The naming required having, somewhere, a second data point. A thread with a different woman's name at the top. A record that said, this sentence was also sent to someone else. This is not how someone speaks when they mean it. This is how someone speaks when they've learned what to say. By midnight, she had written a 12-page timeline. By 1 a.m., she had added a column for professional context. Every instance where his proximity or withdrawal had occurred in relationship to a woman's career trajectory at the firm. She sent it to Priya at 1:17 a.m. with the subject line, First Pass. More to add. Call tomorrow? Priya replied in 4 minutes. You're exactly who I hoped you'd be. 9 a.m.? The three of them met on a video call the following morning. Marisol at her kitchen table. Priya from a home office that had the organized stillness of someone who had been preparing for something for a while. And Rena Cho, who joined from what looked like a parked car, which she explained without apology. My office doesn't have conference rooms available before 10, and I didn't want to do this in an open workspace. Rena was a litigation paralegal at a firm across town. She was the one who had found Catherine and then found Priya. She had a quality that Marisol recognized immediately. A particular combination of thoroughness and patience that you develop when you've been underestimated in professional settings for long enough that you've stopped wasting energy being surprised by it and started redirecting it into being correct. She spoke in the precise, unhurried way of someone who had spent months deciding exactly how to spend her anger and had landed on a very specific expenditure. HR is not the move, she said, the moment the call opened. Not as an announcement, as a conclusion she'd already reached and wanted to put on the table, so they didn't have to argue their way to it. He hasn't done anything technically actionable under workplace harassment law. These aren't professional relationships with a clear power over dynamic. They're adjacent professional relationships. HR would note it, conduct a soft inquiry, and close the file in 3 weeks without anything on record. So we build a record they can't close, Marisol said. That's what I've been doing for 6 months, Rena said. But I needed someone inside Callaway. The pattern at Brantford was clear. I don't know what the pattern looks like at the current firm. I can find out, Marisol said. What does that mean exactly? Priya asked. Marisol looked at the legal pad in front of her. It means I know who left, who was passed over, who asked for things they didn't receive. I know the internal landscape in a way that a current associate wouldn't, because I've been there 4 years and I'm not in his department, which means people talk to me the way they don't talk to people inside his orbit. That's a different folder, Rena said quietly. Yes, Marisol said. It is. There was a pause. Priya and Rena exchanged a look through the screen, the kind of look that two people share when they've been waiting for something and are now uncertain whether believing it has arrived is the same as it having arrived. The quarterly partnership review, Rena said carefully, is in 7 weeks. I know, Marisol said. His name is on the consideration list. I know that too. So, we have 7 weeks to build something worth presenting, or the question becomes considerably more complicated after the vote. Marisol set down her pen and looked at both of them. Then we start today, she said. Tell me everything you know about the Brantford pattern. I'll start on Callaway this afternoon. The second folder took 6 weeks to build, and it required a particular kind of patience, not the patience of waiting which Marisol had been practicing against her will for years, but the patience of noticing, of asking the right questions in the right rooms, of creating enough space in a conversation that the truth could arrive without feeling summoned. She started with the departure records. In any firm, people leave, and their leaving tells a story if you know how to read it. She identified 5 associates who had left Callaway in the previous 3 years after periods of what their performance reviews described in various euphemisms as cultural fit concerns or trajectory plateaus. 3 of them were women. 2 of those women had, prior to their departures, spent extended periods within Daniel's mentorship network. The informal kind. The kind that doesn't get documented in the mentorship program files because it exists in late afternoon coffees and corridor conversations, and the kind of close professional attention that looks, from the outside, like investment in someone's potential. She started with the departure records. In any firm, people leave, and their leaving tells a story if you know how to read it. But she needed to understand his timeline at Branford and Leiss first, the firm he'd left before Callaway, and for that, she needed Priya. She and Priya met for dinner on a Wednesday in December at a Thai place near Priya's apartment that Priya had chosen, because it was loud enough to have a private conversation in public. Priya brought her own timeline, handwritten in a notebook with a green cover, and they spread both documents on the table between their dishes and compared them with the focused efficiency of 2 people who had stopped pretending they were doing anything other than exactly what they were doing. The pattern at Branford started in his 2nd year there, Priya said. I was his 1st year at Callaway, so the behavior predates both of us. By how long? Rena found a reference in a message thread that suggests someone at his law school. But that's 6 years ago, and the person has moved overseas. We decided not to pursue it. Too thin, too old, and it risks the credibility of everything closer to the present. That's the right call, Marisol said. He's careful, Priya said, turning a page. That's the thing I keep coming back to. He doesn't cross any lines that are legible as crossing. He stays just inside the perimeter of deniability, and he's been doing it long enough that he knows exactly where that perimeter is. Then we document everything that lives near the perimeter, Marisol said. Not to prove he crossed it, to show the shape of a man who has spent a long time learning how not to. Priya looked at her for a moment. That's the brief, she said. That's exactly the brief. She reached the first woman through a mutual contact in the bar association. Her name was Sasha Okafor, and she was now at a smaller practice in the Lakeview neighborhood where she seemed, from her public professional presence, to be doing well. They met for lunch under the pretext of a referral conversation. Marisol was looking for a family law recommendation for a client, which was true, and Sasha was a logical referral, which was also true. The Daniel conversation arrived organically, the way things do when you leave enough room for them. Sasha was quiet for a moment after the name was said. Then she said, "He wrote my performance review the year I was considered for the junior partnership track." "He wasn't in your department," Marisol said carefully. "No," Sasha said. "He wasn't. But he was asked to provide a character assessment. An informal one. The kind that isn't part of the official record. And I'd told him 3 weeks before that I wasn't interested in continuing the kind of relationship he seemed to be interested in having. I'd been clear. I'd been polite. Because I thought I had to be." She looked at her water glass. "I didn't make the track." "Did you file anything? Who would I have filed it with?" I had no proof of a connection between those 2 things. I had a closed door and a conversation that wasn't recorded, and a performance process where the feedback is anonymous. A pause. I left 4 months later. Marisol wrote nothing down at the table. She went home and wrote everything down. The second woman was harder to find and harder to reach. But Rena had a contact in her current firm, and the contact made a careful introduction. Her name was Josephine Tran, and she agreed to a phone call but not a meeting, which Marisol respected without comment. She was currently in litigation at a mid-size firm in the eastern suburbs and described herself, in the first minute of the call, as not interested in relitigating anything but willing to talk about the pattern. The pattern she described was functionally identical to Sasha's, a period of close professional attention, a moment of clarification, and then a shift in the ambient temperature of the professional environment around her. Nothing traceable, nothing provable, just a series of small closed doors that added up to a direction. "I want to be honest with you," Josephine said near the end of the call. "What you're describing, a documentation project, feels important. But I'm not in a position to be named in anything formal. I have a career I rebuilt. I'm not willing to spend the next 2 years defending my credibility against his." "You won't have to," Marisol said. "We're not building a lawsuit. We're building a file. A file that exists when the next person needs it, so she doesn't have to build it from scratch." There was a long pause. "Then yes," Josephine said finally. "I'll talk." The file went into a subfolder Rena labeled Professional Impact Record. It was organized differently from the Personal Documentation folder, clinical rather than narrative, structured around events with dates and approximate timelines, noting what was verifiable and what was reported but unverifiable. Being honest about the distinction. Marisol drafted the methodology section herself. The way she'd draft a brief: "Here is what we know. Here is how we know it. Here is what we cannot prove but have reason to believe. Here is the corroborating pattern." She sent it to Rena and Priya on a Sunday afternoon in late November, 3 days before the quarterly partnership review meeting where Daniel Mercer's name was expected to appear for consideration. Rena read it and called her immediately. "This is very good. It's accurate," Marisol said. "That's all it needs to be. Who do we send it to?" This was the question Marisol had been sitting with for 2 weeks. Not HR. Rena had already established that HR was a closed room. Not an external authority. There was nothing legally actionable enough to warrant that. And approaching a regulatory body without cause would destroy their credibility before they'd said anything worth listening to. Not public. That was a defamation exposure that would consume everything. "The managing partner," Marisol said. "Helen Briggs. We send it to her directly, not through any institutional channel she can route away from herself. We frame it as a disclosure, not an accusation. We give her the pattern and let her determine what she does with it. If she does nothing, that's documented too. And if she does something, then we find out what the firm is made of," Marisol said. She sent the email on a Monday morning at 7:43 a.m., before the building opened, from her personal account, rather than her firm address. She'd written it 4 times over the previous week, each draft slightly different in tone, each one testing a different version of what she was trying to do. And, in the end, she'd returned to the first version, the plainest one, because plain was accurate, and accuracy was the point. It was 2 paragraphs long. The first paragraph described the nature of the documentation attached and offered to make the underlying sources available to any formal internal review the managing partner chose to initiate. The second paragraph noted, without editorializing, that a partnership vote was scheduled for the current week, and that she had chosen to share this information before rather than after, which she hoped would be understood as a demonstration of good faith. She did not ask for any particular outcome. She did not threaten any particular consequence. She offered information, and she offered it to the person who would have to explain, in writing, what the firm knew, and when it knew it if any of this became public in a context the firm hadn't controlled. She sent it at 7:43, and then went to make coffee, and then stood at her kitchen window and drank it in the gray Monday morning light, thinking about Rena's question from the night before. What if she reads it and does nothing? Marisol had thought about this. She had an answer. And the answer was, then that is also a record. Then the documentation exists in a place where it cannot be lost, and it has been delivered to the person most responsible for what happens next, and the decision that person makes is theirs to own. That was all you could ever actually control, where the information went and whether it got there honestly. What happened after was not yours. She was at her desk by 9. By noon, her personal email had a reply from Helen Briggs's assistant, brief and professional, an appointment request for the following morning, 9 a.m., conference room 14. The subject line read, Meeting Ray, Mercer Matter. She forwarded it to Priya and Rena. Priya replied within 2 minutes. All three of us? I assume so. The note says, and colleagues. Rena. I'll be there. Do I need to bring anything? Just yourself, Marisol said. The file speaks for itself. Conference room 14 was on the 14th floor, the senior level, where the walls were real wood paneling, and the windows faced the lake, and the furniture was the kind that communicated that conversations held inside it had weight. Helen Briggs was already seated when the three of them arrived. She was 62. The third equity partner in the firm's history, and the first woman. And she had the particular stillness of someone who had learned early that visible emotion was a currency with an irregular exchange rate in rooms like this one. She shook hands with each of them and gestured to the chairs across the long table without preamble. A carafe of water sat between them. No one's hand moved toward it. I've read the documentation twice, she said, once they were seated. Walk me through it in your own words. They did. Marisol took the lead on the structural overview. Priya filled in the personal record. Rena addressed the professional impact section with the precise, measured delivery of someone who had spent time deciding exactly how much emotion to allow into each sentence. Helen Briggs asked 6 questions over the course of 40 minutes. They were not defensive questions or dismissive questions. They were the questions of a person constructing a complete picture in real time, testing the load-bearing elements. When they finished, she was quiet for a moment. Nothing in this file is legally actionable as presented, she said. I want to be transparent with you about that. We know, Marisol said. The personal conduct, the pattern you've documented, exists in a gray area that employment law has not adequately addressed, and I suspect it will not address adequately within a time frame that is useful to this conversation. She paused. However, I don't find it acceptable on its own terms, separate from the legal question. And what you've documented in the professional impact section is concerning in a way I intend to examine internally. She looked at each of them in turn. What are you asking for? It was Rena who answered. She answered in the steady voice of someone who had been preparing this answer for a long time. We want the pattern documented in the firm's internal record, not as a judgment, but as a disclosure. We want the women named in the professional impact section formally consulted through a process they can trust. We want Daniel Mercer's partnership consideration suspended until that process is complete. And we want to know that if there is a next time, there is already a record this conversation can attach to. Helen Briggs picked up her pen and wrote something at the top of the legal pad in front of her. Marisol, from across the table, could not read it. Later she would decide it didn't matter what it said. What mattered was that she picked up the pen. "I'll need 2 days to consult with outside counsel about the review process," Helen Briggs said. "The partnership vote will be postponed pending that consultation." "Is there anything you need from me in the interim?" "Just your word that this doesn't disappear into a committee," Priya said. Helen Briggs looked at her. "You have it." The review took 11 weeks. Marisol did not attend most of it. She had given her account to the outside counsel the firm retained, answered their questions in a 2-hour interview that felt like a deposition and probably was designed to, and then returned to her work on the 3rd floor where the contracts moved through her desk with the reliable indifference of things that needed to be reviewed and had nothing to do with the thing being reviewed upstairs. Daniel Mercer's partnership was not formally denied. It was, in the language the firm issued in a 1-paragraph internal memo distributed to senior staff, indefinitely deferred pending the conclusion of a structured professional conduct review. He remained employed. He remained, technically, present. He texted Marisol 3 days after the memo circulated. "On a Sunday morning, can we talk? Something's happened at work and I could use a friend." She read it standing at her kitchen window with coffee in her left hand, the November light coming in flat and honest and not quite warm enough. She noticed the word friend. She noticed that when he needed something, the category clarified very quickly. She noticed that a friend was the version of her he reached for when he wanted access without accountability, the category that had always been available to him, that she had always provided, that had never actually been mutual in the way friendships are supposed to be mutual. She typed back, "I heard. I hope the review goes fairly." 3 dots. "Gone, then. You knew about this?" "I know a lot of things, Daniel. That's always been true." She watched the 3 dots appear and disappear twice. No message came. She waited 1 more minute. Then she put the phone in her pocket and went to get more coffee and did not look at it again for 2 hours, which was the longest she'd gone without checking it in 4 years. He stopped texting Marisol after that. She didn't notice for 4 days. This surprised her. She'd expected to feel his absence the way you feel the absence of a sound you didn't realize you'd been living with. A refrigerator hum that stops at 2 in the morning and wakes you with its silence. Instead, she just kept working. A Tuesday passed, a Wednesday, a Thursday, and it was on the Friday, somewhere in the middle of reviewing a commercial lease, that she realized she'd been checking her phone a little less, looking up a little less, holding a small low-grade anticipation a little less. She set down the lease and sat with this for a moment. The anticipation had been so present for so long that she'd stopped knowing it was anticipation. It had become the baseline condition of her attention. Always a part of her turned slightly toward the door he might come through, the message that might arrive, the conversation that might resume, and this time reach a different ending. She hadn't chosen that posture. It had assembled itself around her while she was looking elsewhere. Now there was just the lease, the window, the sound of the elevator. It felt like space. She went back to the harbor on a Thursday evening in late January, the one where the temperature had dropped enough that you could see your breath, but not so much that you felt punished by it. The same stretch of dock. The same gray-green water doing its harbor business with the impersonal efficiency of water that has been moving for longer than anyone watching it has been alive. She stood at the railing for a while without thinking about anything specific, which was itself unusual and which she let herself have. Then she took out her phone and looked at the text from 11 weeks ago. "I need you to know I value you too much to lose you." She read it the way she read it now, which was the way she read documents when she already knew what they said. Not for information, but to confirm that she'd read them correctly the first time. The 11 words looked like what they were. A deployment. A phrase from a rotating inventory. A sentence crafted to produce a specific effect in a woman who was already halfway to trusting the person who sent it. She put the phone in her pocket. She thought about Priya, who had looked at a work badge in a coffee line and made a decision in the space of 3 seconds. Who had held a folder for 6 months waiting for the right fourth person, and who had apparently engineered a wallet drop with the kind of premeditation that Marisol found, the more she thought about it, genuinely impressive. She thought about Rena, in a parked car at 9 in the morning, who had spent 6 months building a case not out of a desire for revenge. She'd said so explicitly, more than once, "I don't want revenge, I want architecture," but out of a conviction that the pattern needed to exist on paper before it could stop. She thought about Sasha Okafor and Josephine Train, who had spoken not because it was easy or because they were guaranteed anything in return, but because they recognized the moment and chose not to pass it. She thought about Helen Briggs, who had picked up her pen. She thought about what Rena had said in the conference room. We want to know that if there is a next time, there is already a record this conversation can attach to. Not vindication, not reversal, not the repair of what had been done, just a file that waits, just an architecture that doesn't require the next woman to build her own foundation before she can stand on it. Marisol pulled out her phone again and typed a message to Priya. "I'm at the harbor. I'm glad you dropped your wallet." The response came in 2 minutes. "I dropped it on purpose. Rena told me where you got coffee." Marisol stared at this for a moment. She thought about the coffee cart, the badge, the tilted head, the 3 seconds before Priya spoke. She thought about the word accident and what it actually meant versus what you told yourself in the moment before you were ready to say the true thing. She laughed, the real kind. The kind that rises from the body before the brain has finished approving it. The kind that makes the person across the harbor, if there'd been one, look up from what they were doing and feel, briefly, less alone. She typed, "You absolute menace." "You're welcome," Priya replied. "Drinks Friday? Rena's already in. Catherine's been asking to meet you." "Yes," Marisol wrote. "Tell Rena to bring the folder. I want to make sure it's properly locked." She pocketed the phone and looked out at the water for another minute, long enough for the light to finish going flat and the first lights to come on in the buildings across the harbor. The warm, ordinary light of people in rooms doing the things they did in rooms at the end of a Thursday. Then she walked back up the dock toward the street. Here is what nobody tells you about the sentence "we're safer as friends." It puts the safety in the wrong hands. It sounds like a gift. It is framed as a gift. The man who says it positions himself as someone who is restraining an impulse for your benefit, protecting the valuable thing by not risking it. The sentence is grammatically passive about who is making the decision and actively generous about why. We're safer. Not "I don't want to," not "I'm not ready." We, as though the decision belongs to both of you equally, as though safety is what he is offering rather than what he is withholding. What the sentence actually does is take the question of what you're worth and answer it for you. Quietly, in the middle of the night, through a screen, with a phrase he'd previously sent to 2 other women on the same terms. Marisol had not needed Daniel to answer that question. She had never needed him to. She had been trained by 4 years of proximity to believe that his assessment was information, that his restraint was meaningful, that the version of her he was deciding not to choose was a version she should hold in abeyance while he made up his mind. None of that was true. It had felt true because the vocabulary he used was designed to feel true. That was the craft of it. The folder was true. The documentation was true. The 6 months of Rena's careful attention to pattern. The 31 months of threads. The two women who spoke from parked cars and quiet lunch tables, those were true in the way that records are true, which is the most durable way available. The safest thing Marisol had ever done was not waiting for someone to tell her she was worth choosing. The safest thing she had ever done was walk into the HoloCaf on a Thursday in November and say, "Send me the folder." The safest thing she had ever done was become the kind of woman who could be found by other women who needed exactly what she had. The harbor was still doing what it always did. The water was still moving. The dock held. She had somewhere to be on Friday. Have you ever been handed a carefully constructed reason to stay small? A reason that sounded like love, that used the language of care to close a door, and recognized it only in retrospect, when the same words arrived somewhere unexpected? And have you ever found, almost by accident, that the person who was quietly building something to protect you was someone you nearly walked right past on an ordinary Thursday morning? Tell me about it in the comments. The stories there are always the best ones. And if this found you at the right moment, subscribe. There are more of them.